Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Ladies and gents, welcome back. This is your host, Eric, and today I am joined by the esteemed retired Sergeant Pat McCurdy. Pat, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Commander Eric. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you, man. Thank you. So as some of the listeners, certainly the local listeners, will know you by name. They might know you and your brother, and I hate to package siblings together, but it is just such a
he's
power
the good
duo.
one. He's the good one. So
Whatever. But we'll have to have him on at some point too. But I do want to provide an introduction, a little uncommon for the format of the show, but I've spoken about you either by name or by virtue of how I came to meet you and how you kind of came into my agency and the circles within my agency, and spoken about the example you provided. But for the listeners that are unfamiliar, Pat McCurdy worked for King County Sheriff's Office here in the region, and following the death of Diego Moreno, my buddy and coworker, I've spoken about that many times, but I also have spoken about what prompted me to take a more active role in peer support and peer support leadership. And that was really your example, man. I mean, you and your team came in just this very like, hey, we're here and we're here for you guys. And we were so, I think like most agencies and officers and folks that have experienced that loss inside their agency, like you don't even know which way is up. So a bunch of people come in and it's a little bit different at first, but then you're like, okay, cool. Like they're a bunch of cops and they're really, really nice folks. But you came in, just provided this support. But for me, the hindsight was this framework of how you show up and how you support your people and how you have a very robust, structured peer support team in this culture that was so collaborative and cooperative. And before I just keep kind of throwing all that stuff out, that's why you're here, man. That's why I really wanted to have you on, not just for that, but providing that example, certainly to us at KPD, but also for the region. And I know, in your circles, you've provided so much of that example through the years.
Wow, I am so moved from that, and I appreciate it, and I'm very grateful. Thank you for the kind words.
Yeah, of course. So while I give that introduction of how I came to meet you and how I came to come across your example, I do want to ask, for the listeners and myself, what brought you into law enforcement?
Well, that starts a long time ago. I grew up in a family of servants. My mom was born and raised in Germany, and her mom was a nurse. And if our math is right, I think she was a nurse over 50 some years in Germany first and then in America. My mother was in East Germany. And so when she was little, they first did what they could to resist the incoming reign of Hitler. And there wasn't much they could do to stop that from happening as a nurse and a farmer with little children. But luckily, they were able to kind of sidestep getting caught up in it. And then the Russians took over East Germany, and my mom lived under the horrific, imposing communism that they inflicted on the people there. So my mom's experience defines a lot of my attitude, my brother's attitude in life, because my mom has these stories. And if she could make it through that, there is nothing that frightens me. My mom, this little tiny, now 80-year-old lady who's still sharp as a whip and spry. When she moved to the United States, she met my dad. And my dad self-described himself as an Iowa farm boy. His dad passed away early in life, which also defined a lot of what we do, because he just became this extraordinary person trying to be the dad he never had. He was 7 when his dad passed away. And after serving in the Air Force, where he met my mom, my dad from Iowa, a little tiny town called Oskaloosa, the first police job he got was in Oakland during the 60s. So it was quite a awakening for him. My mom soon afterwards became a deputy sheriff for the Alameda County Sheriff's Department down in the Bay Area. And my uncle in the same area, my mom's brother, was a California Highway Patrol. So we grew up with, like I said, a family of servants, and my dad dragged us everywhere. He was a huge part of our life, and we went to the police department with him and spent time there. And we'd sit in the police car in parades, and there was a police day or something. And then sometimes my dad would grab a radio and run out to help with something going on. I couldn't wait to put on a uniform, and we have pictures of me when I was a baby, the first time I saw my dad in uniform, because he had been a detective. And it was Christmas Eve, and he came home in his uniform, and my mom said, all I kept saying was, "Is this police hat? Is this a police hat?" And I just you could see, enamored by that. From the time I was a little guy, all I ever picked for toys were the police cars. And if I, at the fair, got one of those little red plastic fire hats that they hand out from the fire department, I turned it backwards because the police hat has a brim on it, and they didn't have a brim like you're
My
supposed to.
man. I was getting ready for you to say like you would just give it back to him or smash it on the ground.
Yeah, well, I thought about it. So that's all I ever wanted. My first uniform was a Cub Scout uniform when I was 7, and I couldn't wait. And then I went through that Weeblo Scout. My dad was heavily involved in that, and used the Cub Scouts to teach leadership and speaking in front of a group and developing life skills, which I later got to do with my kids. And so he was a great dad. He was going to be a minister, another service-oriented profession, and was a lay minister training for that when he decided to become a police officer. So I guess in a way that's kind of a ministry, still helping, the downtrodden and the poor and the helpless and protecting others. And my mom, I didn't say this, she quit law enforcement to have me and raise us. And so she stayed at home with us and raised us and had a short tenure. But it's still the times in her life that she talked about the most were under the threat and fear of communism and the horrible things that happened there. And then her experiences working in a jail during the 60s, which also created a lot of trauma in her life and stuck with her still to this day. They're the stories that she tells more than any other. So at 14, I could finally become a police explorer. And that was the uniform I really wanted. And I couldn't wait. And within that first year as a police explorer, within a short period of time after I got there, our captain of the explorer unit died by suicide. And it rocked all of us. He was a super squared away kid, great athlete, great student. And it was over something we know later in life is something you'll get over. I think he didn't get the assignment he wanted from the military recruiter that he was seeing. And then his girlfriend broke up with him. And they gave him a funeral with some honors, not a full police funeral, but they had, a police escort and an honor guard. And they were very fond of him. And within the same year, a second police explorer died by suicide. And same type of reason, it was a girlfriend thing, which is a heartbreaker when you look at it as an adult later. And he also thought that the funeral that was given was quite an honorable way to go. And we think that influenced his decision.
Man.
During that same year, between 14 and 15, I experienced my first line of duty death. And Officer Ray Wooster, who was one of my dad's guys when he worked there, died. He was murdered at a domestic violence call. He was stabbed. And it was on the street I lived on, Broadmoor Avenue, a few blocks from my house in Hayward, California, and a half a block or so from the police department. So those things have a profound impact. I remember my dad, I remember at one of the funerals, because there were several in rapid succession, mostly line of duty deaths during that time period. And I remember saying to my dad, man, I can't stop crying at these funerals.
Hmm.
And my dad gave the right answer, but I didn't want to hear that. I wanted to hear something else, because what he said was, it's okay. A real man cries, and there's no shame in crying. In fact, let it show. He said, let it show,
Wow.
because you are honoring them with your emotion. But what I heard was not that. What I heard was, suck it up and be tough, because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. I thought, he can't be right. He's just trying to appease me.
Wow.
And so I came up with the immature scheme that if I went to more funerals, I should be going, because I felt it's my obligation, because they died serving their
Hmm.
community and their country, like my dad was doing. And I figured if I went to more, I'd develop a callus and become better at it, where I couldn't cry, or I
Like
wouldn't cry.
conditioned, huh?
Yeah. And you know
Man.
how well that works. That's like when you hurt your ankle badly during a run and you decide you're going to keep running to toughen up. And
Yeah.
after a while, it just breaks and it
Yeah.
doesn't work for you anymore. So,
Yeah. Can I interject real quick? Because,
yeah, please.
we talk about, well, I've talked about this on the podcast, but these notions of traditional masculinity. And that's something that, I imagine would come up later in the conversation, because you are such a caring, sensitive dude. And I mean that in the best way, because men should be those things. But certainly, in generations past, and even current generations in certain cultures, like that's a big part of the culture that my family came from, where it's very much like that, suck it up. And no, it's more of men don't cry. And it was more of those conversations. Like, I was a sensitive kid. I mean, I'm a sensitive guy. So to be labeled as a sissy was, not preferable. Like, that didn't feel good as a kid. But have you thought much about, where that came from for your dad to say that, especially with his generation, which I would wager is more uncommon than common, to support that and to nourish and foster that notion that you were feeling?
Yeah, I wish I still had my dad here. I wish that I had the opportunity to have a conversation with him, because I don't
Mm.
know. He was always a very kind person who took care of others. And I think the people that were his examples were that way. His uncle Blackie played a huge part on his life. And he was a very kind person. I had the opportunity to meet him a few times before he passed. And I think I think it was growing up in a really hard place during a really hard time. And I think he had
Mm.
the strong male support to do that. I think you're right that we misconstrue what strength is. We think of strength as this outward toughness.
Hmm.
And I do think there is a place for toughness. If my kids fell down, I'd say, get up, you're okay. And I think that there's a place for that. My
For sure.
boys are at that age. They're turning 22 and 24. And they struggle with this still, where they try so hard, especially my middle son. He's constantly trying to prove his manhood or his masculinity or toughness.
Hmm.
And I think there is a certain amount of that we have to do, because we have to prove it to ourselves. But other people, I don't think they care as much as we think they do. And the truth, later in life, my dad taught me a lot. And I would rather deliberately be known for being intentionally kind and for caring for other people than for being the tough badass.
Yeah.
But when I speak, I often use that as my premise, and I'll walk out, because that's my audience. A bunch of tough guys with their tattooed arms folded in front of me and a scowl on their face. And I
Yeah.
often walk out and say, my
It's
name's
a cop training, like, posture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Whatever it is.
firefighters.
Yeah.
Yeah, whoever I
Hmm.
have, military guys, when I talk to them. And so I walk out, and to get my street cred, or whatever you call it, I'll start up, my name's Patrick and I'm a badass, which is so pretentious, and it's really not me. And I have to be careful, because I have, at least on one occasion, had an audience where it was a huge audience, a few hundred people, and just a few people took it the wrong way. But I have to be careful that when I clarify later with humor, that's all it is, because
Mm.
I show systematically how that mask that I wore pretty effectively for a lot of my career just didn't cover me after a certain amount of time. And I should say, too, to reflect back on my dad used to say, you never talk to four people. You never talk to attorneys, politicians, the media, or a damn shrink. And He was right about three. I mean, you shouldn't probably talk to too many attorneys, politicians, or the media as a police officer, but the damn shrink, if my dad talked to them, I wonder if he would have passed from early onset acute stress induced Alzheimer's, because my dad definitely carried the weight of the profession into his life, and it affected him negatively later when he lost his memory. Although, what a fun way to go, to relive all your best moments in reverse. And he kept thinking in the old folks' home that he was back in the riots in Oakland again.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
you, it is a positive flip, right? And you have a way about that. You're just saying that as far as like delivering this training to our traditional audience, right? Like to come out and put on this persona that you were very familiar with, right? To be this badass. And even this notion of like, hey, like this is what masculinity should be. It should be carrying. At the same time, like, yeah, I definitely wanted to prove myself. Like when I was becoming a man, and then when I became an officer, like that was very much a proving ground for myself to get street cred and to earn my place, and through these very traditional needs. And some of them are very like warranted. They're part of the job, right? You can hold your own, and you can be an asset in a struggle, and all these very physical, tough, quote unquote things. But it wasn't until much later, that I felt more and more comfortable, I suppose, coming into myself and just realizing like the best officer I can be and the best leader I can be is just being who I am. And in a lot of ways, it's that, kind of sensitive, creative, goofy, artistic kid that I was, at my core. Um, what helped
yeah.
you find that and kind of balance those two things? Because for those that don't know you and maybe haven't seen the social media that will go along with this aired episode, but you're a big dude. Like you're not the guy that someone's going to want to mess around with, or is going to find out pretty quickly that they definitely shouldn't have.
Well, I think the two are synonymous, to be honest, and that is so contrary to what we're taught. I think that we definitely don't want cops that are going to give up when they're in a fight with a homicide suspect in an alley. We need people who are tough enough. And I joked about running on a hurt ankle, but that's the time to do it. You keep pushing through until help gets there, until you do what you have to do.
Mm,
And I think that there's a balance. And when we're young, everything, I mean, our whole life is out of balance, because if you think step by step, each individual step we take forward requires rebalancing. And if you miss a step, like if you don't realize you're stepping off a curb or trip over something, it requires immediate rebalancing. And I think that's how our life is. So I think that we have the ability to be the caring, sensitive individual once we've learned or proven to ourselves that we can be dangerous and take care of business as well. And there are a lot of people who talk about this. Jordan Peterson comes to mind, and people like Jocko Willink. I think that when you have proven to yourself that you're capable of doing what you need to do in the moment, for us as police officers or as first responders, it may be not in not trying to be a hero, but acts of heroism. It may require overcoming great fear and dangerous circumstances to do what needs to be done, and that's on a regular basis. But I think that confidence is what allows us to be the other person too, and I think that comes with maturity. Karate Kid kind of embodies this. He first taught Danielson to heal
mhm.
before he taught him, and he taught him life skills before he taught him to fight, and then taught him how that transferred. And I think that we often try to thrust ourselves into the toughness, and I definitely did, playing football and all of that as a kid. And I think that's a pride thing. I think that's something I still struggle with occasionally, where I have to check my pride. And luckily, I've been stripped of it over the last few years. But I have to
Mm.
check my pride and stay grounded and remember that um, you can be just as tough and manly and serve other people and respect them and elevate them. And I don't have to elevate myself. Actually, it feels better to elevate somebody else. So I'm not sure if I answered
Yeah.
your question or if I just rambled a little bit about my
You did.
philosophy.
No, you absolutely did, and then it generated a couple other things. The comment you just said, it reminds me of kind of this duality. Sometimes it's the two sides of the coin doesn't mean it has to be more one than the other, right? They're equal parts, and they can actually feed into each other, right? The stronger you are in all the ways, right? Emotionally, physically, like that can help you be a more caring asset, right? If you have the confidence and the competence and just the ability in whatever way you choose, right? You take the good with the bad, and with the ability to endure, so that categorical toughness, like it gives you the ability to be soft and nurturing, potentially, right? That other energy. As you're speaking, it made me think about the notion and the concept of resilience, and I think that when people think and they stop and hear the word resilience, at first it's like, okay, that's synonymous with wellness, or it's, kind of this mental health conversation. But if we really think about what resilience is, it's not just to toggle back and be in touch with our feelings, or, it is truly like, yeah, no, there are times kind of like your ankle allegory when you have to get that bad dude in the alley. No, you're gonna push it, right? And you might injure it worse, but that's kind of the point. Like, you're gonna do what you have to do, even if it sidelines you for 3 to 6 months or longer. You're gonna do it because you have to. It's necessary, and you're gonna be okay, and you're gonna nurture it. You're gonna have to take some time off to heal it. But that all is kind of the crux of resilience. Sometimes you have that callus that gets you through. Other times it ruptures, but you have the time and the resources and the support to get it back to where it needs to be.
Yeah, that's actually profound because it makes me think about, well, let's take your own example with Diego, a person
Hmm.
who was just this vibrant light, and he was loved by his family and the community and his department, and then to go in to a group of people that you care about, even though a lot of you I met the first time during that. I mean, you're all doing the same job and putting yourselves out there. And I definitely care. I mean, look who I was raised by and where I was raised. Care deeply about my police officers and firefighters and EMTs and nurses, dispatchers. But to sit there with you in that, there are a couple of expressions I really like. And one is holding space.
Yeah.
And to me, I think about when my two friends died by suicide, and we would sit at the table and have seats available for them. And in a way, we were holding space for them and thinking that there's always a seat for you, but also leaning in. And to me, I picture my healing place often as the ocean, going to the beach or the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And I picture just standing in this onslaught of waves and wind and having to take a forward leaning posture aggressively to hold your balance and stay upright. And so I think that what you just said makes me realize that you need the physical toughness and, like, to use your word, grit, the grit, in order to be able to survive the emotional toughness. One parlays very easily into the other one. And when you begin to learn in very difficult circumstances, like we use the hurt ankle as one, or doing things like, I love jujitsu and martial arts. I taught defensive tactics for a long time because I feel like when you are learning to overcome being choked out by a person
Mm-hmm.
who's more skilled than you, the first time you panic, and the second time you panic.
Yeah.
The third time you still panic, but you start to realize, I'm still breathing. I can work through this. And then after that, you can work through a really difficult circumstance, which translates to everything we do. It translates to being in that fight that we talked about. It translates to being in a pursuit and calming your nerves when everything seems to be moving at really high speeds. And
Mm-hmm.
then it helps us to calm our mind when we're sitting with another person, leaning in during the most difficult time in their life. And so you helped me to connect those dots and answer the question a little bit more appropriately.
No, no, no. Thank you. And it's like, I mean, that is one of the many uh, benefits of having conversations like this, and having the show, because yeah, I could very well connect with you, here and there, and we certainly do in our circles, which is great. But to really just set aside time, right, hold space, for the both of us, but also for this community that we know we're speaking to, I think it's a beautiful thing. And even like, another thought that kind of jogged in my mind that is very relevant to all these conversations is, you give the example of defensive tactics and, martial arts and BJJ, right? And so there certainly is that, putting yourself into that place of discomfort so that you can sit there, right? And you can, maybe you're not going to win this little bout, but you can certainly get through the next 30 seconds and not get tapped out, not get choked out. And that's like a perfect allegory for life, right? Because you inject these periods of discomfort and this hardship and adversity. Sometimes you inject them, sometimes they find you and you navigate them, right, with your support systems and your own, healthy practices, whatever they be. Like you can get through, right? So just weather the storm, and it might feel like an eternity, but if you're on those mats, with a little bit of practice, okay, I can wait out the next 20 seconds, and then maybe my opponent slash life that's coming at me will tire out and it'll subside, and then I'll make my move. And I think that we can put that into context of life. But then also with things like that, it's also the surrender of ego. You talked about that, or we were talking about pride, and maybe we can come back to that too, is that I've certainly had my moments where you just want to grind and grind and grind, and you start redlining. I mean, before we started recording, we were both talking about our tendencies to, dive into work and create work, right? To be valuable to others, to be an asset. But that does take a toll, and it does have its own limitations that we need to be cognizant of. But whether it's whatever type of physical training, weightlifting or uh, defensive tactics, you do need to surrender the ego, and that is so impactful for me for life, because sometimes there are those times where you can't just muscle yourself through. You have to surrender and be in that space and just be present and accept the inputs that are coming in, and then figure out, with some time and some reflection and some grace, like which way you need to go.
Yeah, I think when you use the opponent analogy too, sometimes you have to get crushed by your opponent. Sometimes you have to lose.
Mm,
And learning to lose is a part of life that we try to avoid. We don't want to
yeah.
fail. But failing is probably a bigger instructor to us or teacher to us than success. Carol Dweck wrote a book called Mindset,
Yeah.
which I thought would make me, when I read it, a better father, husband, teacher, sergeant. What it did for me was illustrate where my leaders were failing, where they didn't have the ability to have a growth mindset. And what they did was, if somebody else received an accolade or recognition, they felt threatened, like it should have been them. They should have been in the
Hmm.
spotlight. And um, it's so much more rewarding to have your guys, because none of us are good at, in first responder world, at accepting awards. You look at people receiving in the military the Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest award you can receive for valor and bravery. They never look happy. They're reliving their worst moment, and you can see it on their faces. They're
Hmm.
in this horrible state, remembering what it took to get that award. And they would rather have their friends back that they lost during the event than have some award given to them by a president that, is only going to be there for a couple years. So I feel like losing is a big piece. And if we continually submit ourselves to a process, and we talked about martial arts and BJJ, there's wrestling, there's football, but whatever your endeavor, I mean, if it's just weightlifting, you're trying to set a new PR, a new personal record or something, failing on a regular basis also keeps us grounded and humble.
Hmm.
And life doesn't always allow us to win. I mean, Diego was a loss for all of us.
Yeah.
And I have, unfortunately, a lot of those,
Hmm.
but that prepared me for what I do and what I've been able to do. So I'm grateful for it in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's the exact appropriate way to look at it. Yeah, they're absolute losses, and yet, with an abundance mindset, like there has to be good that comes from this. And we think about our fallen brothers and sisters, our loved ones that are gone, and certainly if that is what happens in the cards for any of us, we would not want everyone to be wallowing in sadness. And certainly, I think for me personally, Diego and many, Diego's example was very easy to see. This, the common assignment was larger than life. And, certainly so many years later, like, everyone's memory is still that he's just like the ridiculous bouncing off the wall community engagement guy on social media and doing all these things, right? And all these things that kind of nudged me and inspired me to do a lot of the things that I'm doing now. But in that, you have to recognize the community and the bonds and the positivity and the legacy, in each individual person that he touched, but then collectively, I think that
Yeah.
I've chosen to focus more on that the longer I'm in this career that does have a lot of hardship, that does have a lot of trauma and stress and hurt, because if not, then what is it all for? And too often we see our peers that they're stuck in that low spot, and all we can do is be patient and try to nudge them, try to encourage them to come up and look at things through a different lens, because I mean we do have that choice, even though it's hard to see at times.
Yeah, there's actually a formula. And so the formula for resilience or growth, the original intended definition of resilience was a scientific term, and it meant the ability of an object once stretched or stressed to regain its original shape. Now, I think about a rubber band when we talk about that, and we can stretch it and flex it. And the first time we do it, there's this tension, but or blowing up a balloon, once we do it, if we let the air out of the balloon, it's easier the second time. But if we let it sit in our drawer for a long period of time, it becomes hard and brittle and will break if not used. So resilience is a good word, and I really like it. I do think, like you said, it's a little bit overused now, and people associate it with this woo wellness thing, but I think it applies to so many things. But there is a formula. Sure. And so we know that there are a lot of things that positively affect our ability to heal, and that could be physical healing. And it is the same stuff that helps us with our emotional and spiritual healing. So with the ability to heal, clearly fitness comes into play, and the ability, because a lot of the things that we experience that create trauma are fight or flight inducing scenarios. And our body and our mind, our emotions respond, our body and our soul, I would say, respond the same way to any type of stimulus. So if we have that call where we're driving fast and jump out to chase a bad guy, of course, then it's normal that we go into fight or flight. And then in that circumstance, we often have the opportunity to burn those chemicals from our body, the cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, testosterone, all those things, men and women, that flood our bodies because we fight or flee. However, if we don't, like if the threat comes from our own administration or the politicians, and we have no shortage of those things in our state, if it comes from the media misrepresenting a story that we're involved in and painting it in a bad light when that wasn't what happened, or, an argument with your spouse, those things still create the same flush of thousands of hormones into our system to prepare us for fight or flight. If we don't fight or flee and burn those off, they remain in our system, and they're very caustic to us and damaging. So the physical fitness is a very important piece. Emotional fitness is important too, and it's a lot of what we talked about. It's having a realistic grasp on life, accepting that death occurs all the time, but also having the ability to put meaning to it. For me, the phrase "whatever happens is meant to be" became my go-to, because I can't make sense of why a young, good person could die, especially by violence. And when I lost a few friends, I had to come to that conclusion. And I really did, because in every death, I would never speak ill of the dead, but I will speak about how they died if it will prevent another death. And that's what I did a lot teaching at the academy, talked about perhaps mistakes that were made or unsafe decisions or placement in relation to the threat, etc. Now, the other thing that significantly helps our healing, and the number one rated category when in dozens of overlapping scientific studies and throughout research is faith. And I think that that piece that I said, everything that happens is meant to be, is a small piece of faith, but you have to have a bigger grounding because if we put our faith in the system, we learn very early in our career that's going to fail us.
Hmm.
If we put it in the department we chose to work for, we learn a few years later that that's going to fail us as well. And if we put it in individuals, even individuals we've known all our life and we trust, that can fail us. So we have to have faith in the greater purpose and a grounded spiritual faith. And there's one more piece to that, and I think it's forgiveness. And that can be really hard, especially in this job when you encounter corruption or dishonesty, because those should never be pieces of this
Hmm.
job.
Right.
But it becomes unveiled to us. And I think probably you can relate as you get promoted and move up, you begin to see more behind the curtain, so to speak, that you
Hmm.
didn't see before. And it can be jarring. It can be hurtful to see that this person that you always looked up to isn't who you thought they were, or to see how what we call leadership often isn't, and what happens behind the scenes. And so, if we don't have the ability to forgive, then all we do, Maya Angelou said, the inability to forgive is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies.
Right.
And that would be the same as holding resentment, is not forgiving. So that's kind of the formula, is we have to keep our bodies fit. We have to challenge ourselves with new and difficult things all the time. And we have to emotionally find meaning, even in the worst of circumstances. It doesn't always have to be good meaning. We can still be an optimist and say, well, hopefully when my friend died, they'll save other lives because they can learn from them. Or maybe it leads to better training or better equipment, or a requirement that two officers respond to certain types of calls. But hopefully there is meaning in that. And then, like I said, faith and forgiveness. So there's your formula.
Yeah, that's a lot. And I mean, you covered a lot of ground, and I want to kind of bounce it around as best as I can off memory. But for the listeners, I think it is worth rewinding back, the couple minutes to hear Pat break that down again, because there are so many points where we could go item by item, and maybe we will in a future episode, right? But you could go item by item and have these little conversations. But everything you said, just this harkens back to earlier in the conversation, where it's that connection and um, that idea that I also agree with, where losses should be lessons, right? Losses can be lessons. And yeah, we lose an officer. Okay, what is there to be learned? And no, it's absolutely not to disparage anyone. That's not what we're doing. But for whatever reason, it feels more comfortable to do it because it's distant. It's not someone we personally know, right? If we see an OIS where an officer's killed with bad tactics in Texas, it's easier for us in Washington to talk about it, watch the video, rewind it, talk about it. And it doesn't feel like Monday morning quarterbacking as much, because we know that it's not someone that we know personally, but we are trying to use that example to keep us all safe. We're absolutely not disparaging that officer. But when it gets closer to home, certainly even in our own agencies, that gets really uncomfortable. But whether or not someone's hurt or killed, we should be more comfortable with those things, right? Because there is something to be learned. There is, betterment for us to be safer, to be better, to be more effective. But then also, yeah, I mean, we go into the conversations that you brought up about agency, and so often, especially in the last few years, I mean, we can talk about, the organizational betrayal, right? And these notions. And so frequently in the last few years, I've heard, the department doesn't care, the agency doesn't care. And after a while, I started saying, you're right. And it kind of, people get taken aback. And I'm like, the agency doesn't care, and they never cared, because the agency doesn't have feelings. The agency is just a thing. It's an organization. It's systems, like you said. It's the people within. And I like that next layer that you took it to, which is that, people can let you down. Your leadership, your mentors, even like the people that you look up to, your role models. But ultimately, it's because you're human. Like, we're all human, right? We're all going to make mistakes. And they say don't meet your heroes. So for those that are listening in, like, don't get too close. I'm going to let you down at some point, right? Because I'm human too. Certainly, right? So that I try to share those examples in my mistakes, not to be like, look at me, look at my trauma, but try to learn something from me, right? So you don't have to go through the same thing. But I do think that that's a key thing that's really hard for us, especially as law enforcement, because we learn these things that are very important, like you never lose, right? You always cheat, always win. It's never over till it's over, and even then, it's not over. And then so you have those type of ideologies that probably compete with, never being wrong, and then having leadership that they want to hold it together and they want to appear to never be wrong, but that puts them in a place where they feel like they can't be, and they feel like they can't apologize, and they can't level with you. And so, yeah, I know I just threw a lot back at you,
Oh
but yeah,
yeah,
I'm just trying to think
you're
through
right
it
on.
all, because it is there are a lot of really meaningful conversations within that.
Yeah, no, you're right on. We learn very quickly, and I think we're hired because we have this ability to draw a hard red line where you don't pass it. If you if you take one step farther, you're going to jail. That type of
Mm.
thing. And often, when we collectively become leaders, we use that same attitude. And you know, we don't use the other side of our job sometimes, the caring for the lost elderly person or the hurt child. We don't consider people in that context. And part of that is on both sides. It's because we're both so confrontational. The person receiving, let's say, the discipline or information or whatever it is, or the training sometimes, and the person giving it. And so, yeah, there's a lot. Boy, I feel like we could have, from this conversation, we could branch off into 6 or 7 different hour-long conversations.
For sure, for sure. And so maybe that will be on my list of things. Like, okay, dive back into this this episode and draw out a couple nuggets to expand on. Um, yeah, I do want to take some time and talk about your transition. And part of that was, it's conversations that we had numerous times, but maybe because I've been longer in the career and I have people under my command that are, they're moving up on retirement, and we have a lot of awesome conversations and reflection, but then a lot of these periods of discomfort where I can even recognize, man, I'm like halfway there on a good day, and I know that this is going to be really hard for me to move on to the next chapter and to leave in the rear view, because this career does mean so much, and there's so much that is very much a part of me and in my life. Um, but if
Yeah,
you wouldn't
sure.
mind talking about your transition from sworn officer sergeant to retirement, and what you're doing now, and what that process has been like.
Yeah. In fact, it's such a difficult process that I teach classes on Retire Well with a cadre. There's several of us that teach it
Mm,
because suicide currently is the number one killer of police officers and firefighters. And that's only because we track those two categories that we know that. We don't track dispatchers or corrections officers or EMTs or nurses. Although, if we did, the numbers would be staggering. They'd be incredibly high. Um, the fastest growing subgroup is retired first responders. And that breaks my heart that a person makes it through a 15, 20, 30, 35, whatever, 40-year career, and they end up dying by suicide because they can't stop those thoughts from recirculating over and over again in their dreams and waking hours. Or perhaps they've lost hope and, like I said, lost faith, and maybe are dwelling in that resentment that I mentioned. So transition is really hard. I did not necessarily, I still, if I had what I planned, I'd still be pushing a patrol car. And it wasn't necessarily on my timing or circumstance, but it came when I didn't expect it, and it was such a blessing afterwards. The reason
mm,
it's a blessing is because of those things we talked about. Because though I often find myself out of balance with the amount of work I do, I just by habit, because it's a part of my system, I go back to the balancing things. And things like, I love doing my gardening. I have a little salsa garden basically because I don't have much space,
mm,
but
nice.
I basically grow lots of tomatoes and onions and stuff. The physical piece for me, the fitness, the martial arts are a big piece. Family, all of those things, reading, faith are all big pieces for me. So, but that was something that kept me alive during some of the really difficult periods of my career when those things I talked about, the corruption or other things, reared their head, and I was all in on fighting it against that, and it didn't necessarily go well. um, for me, what happened was all of the years doing really hard things, difficult things, sitting with people through their worst moments. What happens is you get good at that, and you become the person who goes to all of these. So I didn't
Mm-hmm.
just go to Kent when you had your tragedy. I went to Tacoma for theirs and Lakewood for theirs. And when Issaquah had an active shooter, I went out there and helped them, and went
Mm-hmm.
to Snohomish County. And of course, Seattle, worked with them a lot, and a lot of the agencies. And that is not a thing that I chose or wanted to be good at. Helping people deal with egregious, difficult, compounded loss, and often by violence. Um, However, what it did was prepare me, and now that's what I do full time. I work for a family group of 3 groups: the Counseling Team International, where I teach classes on retire well. I help to build and support peer support teams. I teach wellness coordinator courses and other things, and it's drawing directly, and suicide awareness and prevention. And it's drawing from my experience throughout this. And it takes a person who has been there that can establish immediate credibility with those, like I said, hard knuckled, tough guys with their tattoos and their arms folded, sitting there
Mm-hmm.
scowling at you.
Mm-hmm.
The incredible mustaches that the firefighters bring to bear. But then I also work for the Counseling Team International. I said that. And then First Responder Wellness, where we treat people for post-traumatic stress injury. And then also for Shift Wellness, where we build out retreats and systems for departments to build healthier cops from the get-go, instead of letting us fall apart on the job and then trying to deal with it. To bounce back to what you said and not take too much time, transition is something that is incredibly hard for anyone, even a person who I feel isn't really vested in the job, because it's so much of our identity. And it's what, like I said, from the time I was a little kid, I was working to build as my persona and identity and who I was. And trying to shed that is really hard. And occasionally it does crop up. In this state, I often say I'm so blessed I'm not doing that right now, because the aggressive type of police work I did is not acceptable in this state. And I think more people are going to be hurt,
Mm-hmm.
more law enforcement officers, because of the waiting and allowing a suspect to continue to grow in their anger and resentment and violence, and all of that
Yeah.
is dangerous. But it's where we're at. So now I get to help people who are having difficulty with that transition, or who have just seen and experienced so many difficult things that they're having a hard time. And it's truly an honor. So I think, I'm not sure that I actually answered the question, but you were talking about transition. Did I give you some insight into where I come from? Or are you asking for
Yeah.
more about how to do that process?
Yeah, I think those are very helpful notes. And I'm curious, for others, was there, probably have to edit this, but to be frank, I feel like there's a
Sure.
lot that I'm going to edit, because I feel way clunky, by the way,
Oh, no
today.
worries. No, I
But
think you're doing great.
I think my camera threw me off. But I think where I was kind of going was, as far as your working with first responder wellness, it was there like a direct kind of a statement or a couple things you want to say about them, or do you think you covered that in the kind of work you do?
I think I covered it. Unless you do have questions, I'm happy to answer them. I didn't want to take up too much of your time doing that.
No, you're good. You're good. I suppose, are there any? Okay, let me phrase it this way. With your own recent reflections and experience, and then the training that you put on for retirees, are there things that you would invite people to think about if they're recently retired or they have a couple years left? What are the little things that they could be thinking about or doing now to better prepare themselves for the change of chapter?
Uh, that is a good question, and there is a lot. I think that one of the biggest stressors for everybody, especially in this day and age, is finances. And I think that a person who is contemplating retirement or has recently retired should definitely have a financial advisor to help them. And it has to be a person who understands your retirement system. In Washington State, we call it LEF, Law Enforcement Officers and Firefighters Retirement. Excuse me. And knowing how much you have allotted to you and how that's going to be distributed is a big thing, because as well as we are treated and as much as we make with that, it's often not enough for life as it is today. Just buying your own health insurance is difficult. So planning that financial piece is important. Having the I mentioned faith, and that's a big piece because you really have to have systems that ground you when you have those difficult times, and you have to have people that ground you that you can reach out to. And we teach from day one, when you become a baby cop, when you're a police explorer and you become a baby cop, or like me, I was a jailer first, a police cadet, then a jailer, and then I finally got my dream. We keep saying have diversity in your friendships and relationships and family relationships. I didn't. My mom and dad were both police officers. My brother's a police officer. My wife, I met her over a dead body on the job. She was a deputy. My brother's
What a way.
ex-wife.
Yeah. What a first date.
Yeah. Yeah. That wasn't the date, but the date came soon afterwards. But,
Yeah.
I didn't have that balance, but now life is so good to have that. I've reconnected with my friends from high school. Some friends literally my longest time friends have been friends for over 40 years now. And we have the same goofy, stupid humor we had.
Wow.
We drive around blasting the same rap music we listened to back in high school. And we get together a couple times a year. We've been to Tahoe and Vegas. We've been to Korea. We've been here in Washington, back home
Wow.
where I grew up in the Bay Area. And it is just so healthy and fun. And it's a totally different perspective because they all come from totally different perspectives. They're not just police officers who are beat up on the job, kind of worn out. They have, I don't always agree, but we can laugh about it. And we have a stupid penalty if you lose a game. Like if you lose this round of whatever game, we're phase 10 we're playing, everybody on the winning team gets to flick your forehead as hard as you can. Things like that.
It's the little things.
Yeah, but
It does sound really uncomfortable, though.
Yeah. My friend's Korean, and Koreans always have penalties for losing. But that's the thing that we know. We know we're supposed to have diversity in relationships. We know that we're supposed to do healthy things like having hobbies and activities, using our hands to keep our mind occupied. We're supposed to stay fit. And those are all the things that slip away when you're experiencing trauma. And we start to postpone things like after a big event because we're tired. We worked a lot of extra hours. The first thing to go is we say, well, I'm too tired. I'm not going to work out today. And we have some excuse. When we're experiencing trauma, we can't focus enough to do those hobbies and things that occupy our hands and our minds. Those are the things that we need. And we need to have perspective on it too, because when I reflect on my life and my career, I remember all the good times. I don't dwell on the bad. I tend to be an optimist. And that sometimes skews my perspective a little bit because when I actually think about the things I'm grateful I'm not doing. Just the other day, a couple of King County Sheriff's Department cars shot up to the light I was at, turned on their lights, went through the red, and then took off. And I said, man, I missed that. But I was fortunate a couple blocks later to catch up to them, and they were dealing with that nasty, dirty, drug addicted homeless person who pooped his pants a week ago and hasn't changed them. And I said, well, I don't miss that piece.
Yeah.
And, so having the grounding and looking at the things that weren't good sometimes helps us to realize that we can do something better. And we also don't realize how marketable we are as former law enforcement, firefighters, first responders. We have skill sets. I remember one job that I applied for before I found this amazing opportunity was being an operations manager at a fitness production company. And it said, must be capable of making quick decisions on the fly in high stress situations. And I was laughing, thinking, you mean like a riot in downtown Seattle with 10,000 people burning the city?
Yeah,
I don't think you could
Jocko would say,
parallel that.
check.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good.
got it. Yeah,
So
good,
those are the
check.
things. I think you need to, if you don't have friends and groups, I mean, it's super easy. You can go to a church and join a men's group or a women's group, or you can, if your interest is golf, you can find a group that likes to golf together. You do need diversity in activities, diversity in friendships. And like you said, and something I'm still bad at is just taking the time to enjoy the moment you're given. Since we only get 12 days of sunshine here in the Seattle area, on at least
Mhm.
6 or 7 of those, you should be outside doing something nice with people you care about.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, you spoke on a couple of the big F's, and I know that a lot of people have a lot of F's to focus on, right? But there's finance. That's a big one that we put a little bit lower on the totem pole of wellness or first responder wellness, but yeah, absolutely crucial. Um, you threw in their faith earlier, right? And that's a pillar for everyone. And I've said this before too, right? Some people get uncomfortable with faith, but like for those people, because I was one of those people, think broadly. Like you believe in something, and if you're listening to this and you care about taking care of people, whether you're a first responder or not, if you're a first responder, you certainly care about a lot of somethings, like a big somethings. So yeah, what do you believe in purpose and community? Um, yeah, you mentioned fitness, family, friends, a lot of these F's that people can focus on. There's another F, focus. Um,
Yeah, I didn't even
not
realize.
feces though. To your last story.
Although, when you ask people their most embarrassing moment, I guarantee 9 times out of 10 it will involve poop. So you never know. There's some humor in that too.
Yeah, there's a pretty good stat there. Um, Man, Pat, and as we've alluded to, we are probably already due to put something on the books, in the next few months as another
Sure.
conversation. But I want to thank you for several things. I want to thank you for your time today, sharing this space. I want to thank you for the example you've provided, as I kind of clunkily described at the beginning. Coming in and that support, personally, very much personally to me as a role model, as an example and a mentor. Um, what you did for me and my team with Diego's loss, but then perpetually, as you described, so many departments, you and your team, to build more peer support teams that can see what it looks like to do CISD, to see what it looks like to have a systematic approach to coming in, supporting your own, supporting neighboring agencies. Like I feel very, very blessed and grateful that I was able to do that for a couple other agencies, but literally, and it's not about me. It's because I was providing an example from King County, like because y'all came in and demonstrated what that can look like. And I know that there's other people that were able to see what we were able to do, or be, part of Deputy Dom Colada's. Like, so many agencies responded, and your brother, facilitated all that, just as like a peer support lead and an administrator that knows logistics. Like we all have a piece of this, and it's in these tragedies. I think it's so humbling but necessary to take a step back and look at all the beautiful things. Look at the honor guard that come in from all over. That's a job that I I have not gravitated towards, and I have the most utmost respect for those folks that are there to represent and truly honor. Um, but yeah, just thank you for everything that you've done for the first responder community and continue to do. Like we barely talked about your mentorship as a supervisor and you teaching at the academy, which is one of the most valuable roles, as far as teaching our newer men and women coming in and to be our future leaders. So thank you, 1,000 more times.
Well, thank you. I feel like I'm reaping the benefits of all this, and it allows me to really feel good and collapse into bed, tired, feeling like I accomplished something. But people like you are taking it. Let's just smash that stigma. Let's get rid of the we always have to be tough guys, and let's change it for the better. Where we have so many people rushing to take care of one another that we have to turn some away. Let's work on that.
Yep. I've said it before, but I'll say it again. My goal is to help all these conversations be redundant. I want these types of conversations to be eye rolls, not because people are put off, but more because they're like, yeah, I know, yeah, I know, boss, or kind of like your eye rolling kid that's like, yeah, dad, I know. Um, that's my goal. And I think that I know that we're getting closer and closer the more we do this.
Yeah, definitely. It's long overdue.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Pat. Where can folks find you or find more about what you do?
It's pretty easy. I am on Facebook and LinkedIn, and uh, also on the web pages for First Responder Wellness, the Counseling Team International, and Shift Wellness. Their little profiles there. Hopefully, they changed the picture because it was pretty bad. um, and if you're looking, I shouldn't be hard to find, but definitely, if you have questions or concerns, if you think that one of your loved ones or you might be suffering from post-traumatic stress injury or just overwhelmed by stress or retirement or something like that, give me a call, because you don't have to suffer. And there are lots of us that have been there, and I'd love to.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Pat.
Yeah, thank you, Eric.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.